Chapter 2. Own it all, but empower others. Jocko Willink. Fallujah, Iraq, 2003. There was blood all over the floor and smoke in the air. I heard shots fired outside, but I wasn't quite sure who was shooting or what they were shooting at. I moved down the hallway, confirming that all the rooms had been cleared. I soon found the source of the blood, a wounded Iraqi civilian on whom my SEAL hospital corpsman, a highly trained combat medic, was working to apply medical care. "What happened?" I asked. "He was by the door on the breach," the SEAL corpsman answered. "He must have been close, lost an eye and part of his hand. It hit an artery. That's why there's so much blood." The explosive breaching charge our SEAL platoon had used to enter was designed with enough power to open the door but minimize any potential collateral damage to civilians inside the house. This man was apparently just on the other side of the door and hit by shrapnel. "Is he going to make it?" I asked. "Yeah, I've got the bleeding stopped," the corpsman answered. He motioned to a tourniquet he had on the Iraqi's arm. He was now working on the man's eye. "Roger," I said, and continued on. The hallway was a loop that circled the whole floor of the building. It ran back into itself near the stairwell we had ascended to start the clearance. Checking the last room, I saw that it had been cleared. I keyed up my radio and announced, "Target secure, set security, and start the search." It was fall of 2003, and my SEAL platoon had launched on this operation to capture or kill a terrorist leader in the Iraqi city of Fallujah. It was one of the most dangerous areas in Iraq, with high probability of an enemy attack. I was the platoon commander, but my senior enlisted leaders knew what to do. They took charge, ensured security was set, and initiated the search of each room. We detained 13 military-aged males, any of whom could have been the terrorist we were after. We zip-tied their hands, searched them, and prepared to walk them out of the building to our vehicles for transport from the target. A voice crackled over the radio headset on my ear. "Might want to hurry up a little in there, Jocko. The natives are getting restless out here." It was my task unit commander on the radio. He was outside controlling the Humvees and the dismounted SEALs on external security, as well as coordinating with the U.S. Army units in the area. As the ground force commander, he was in charge of the entire operation, including me and my assault force. My assault force had entered the building where the terrorist was believed to be located, cleared and secured it, and now it sounded as though we needed to hurry up our search. "Roger that," I replied. There was some confusion on target for my assault force, even more than we might have expected. Clearing a building can be complicated, but the layout of this building was particularly unorthodox. Lots of small adjoining rooms and nooks to be cleared. To further complicate matters, the multiple explosive breaching charges and crash grenades we deployed left a cloud of thick smoke in the air that obscured our vision and added to the confusion. There were also a number of prisoners and the wounded Iraqi requiring medical attention, so it was no surprise we were getting bogged down and had lost our momentum. It seemed no one was quite sure what the next step should be. I told a couple of my guys to start wrapping it up. "We need to leave," I said. They nodded their heads and kept doing what they were doing. No progress was made. On top of everything else, I had heard shots fired outside, which could have been anything from warning shots to an escalating firefight. The shots were what had prompted the warning from my task unit commander. I had to get the platoon moving. "Listen up!" I yelled loudly. Suddenly the whole building was quiet. "If you aren't on rear security, start moving back here to me. Check out, grab a prisoner, and escort them back out to the Humvees. We're taking all military-aged males. Go!" Almost instantly, the platoon was back on track. Guys moved toward the exit, checked out with me, grabbed a prisoner, and took them down the stairs to the street. A minute later, my leading petty officer, the LPO, a key leader in the platoon, came up to me, tapped me on the shoulder, and reported that all prisoners had been escorted out. Only the two of us and the last two guys on rear security were still in the building. "All right then, let's roll," I said. The LPO told the rear security team to collapse, to move toward the exit. And once they reached us, we made our way out of the building. We waited at the doorway to the street, and when the rear security element reached us, we all moved to our assigned Humvees. Once we were in, the lead navigator made the call. Up count from the rear. The vehicle commanders in each Humvee sounded off. 6 is up, 5 is up, 4 is up, 3 is up, 2 is up, 1 is up, we're rolling. And with that, the convoy moved out. Down the darkened streets of Fallujah, guns pointed outward, eyes peering through our night vision goggles, scanning for threats. Traveling at a fast pace and completely blacked out proved effective in avoiding an enemy ambush. Half an hour later, we were safe inside the perimeter of an Army forward operating base. We turned over our prisoners to the Army detention facility and the intelligence personnel with whom we had been working. Once that turnover was complete, we got back on the main road that connected Fallujah and Baghdad. The roads in the vicinity of Fallujah were rough, damaged from continuous violence. But once outside of Fallujah, the road became a highway not unlike many found in America. An hour or so later, we were back at our base adjacent to Baghdad International Airport. A few short months earlier, before the war kicked off, the airport had been named Saddam Hussein International Airport. Once on base, we followed our standard operating procedures, or SOPs. First, we refueled the Humvees in case we got another call to go out. We wanted to be ready. Next, we parked the Humvees, dismounted, and mustered in our platoon planning area to debrief the mission. Still wearing our op gear just in case we needed to relaunch on short notice, we went through each detail of the operation, where mistakes were made, what we could have done better, and what we did well. Once the debrief was complete, we went back to the vehicles to perform maintenance of the platoon gear, in this case, the Humvees, heavy weapons, navigation systems, and communications gear. When that was complete, we moved to our weapons cleaning area and cleaned our personal weapons. Only after the team and platoon gear had been taken care of did the SEALs clean and perform maintenance on their personal gear and then, finally, themselves. A shower and perhaps a quick bite to eat. As soon as that was complete, the assistant platoon commander and I began looking at possible operations for the next night, preparing approval documents to run up the chain of command, and building operations briefs to give to the platoon. By 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, we would go to sleep for a few hours and be up in time for lunch at 11. That quickly became the cycle for running these operations, conducting largely nighttime direct action raids targeting suspected terrorists or Saddam Hussein regime loyalists. It might seem hard to believe, but like most SEAL platoons at the time, we had no previous real combat experience. Everyone in my platoon had missed the first Gulf War, which had lasted only 72 hours with limited ground combat. We were too young to have fought in Grenada or Panama. SEALs who saw action in Somalia were few and far between, and there weren't any with us. The closest most of us had come to combat before the Iraq War kicked off had been anti-smuggling operations in the northern Arabian Gulf, enforcing UN sanctions against Saddam's government. We boarded ships and smaller wooden vessels called dhows that were suspected of smuggling oil or other contraband out of Iraq. We shadowed the vessels from our small boats or by helicopter, and once we were confident they had entered international waters, we boarded the vessels, quickly made our way to the bridge of the ship, and took control of the vessel and crew. Once we had them secured, we would call in a U.S. Navy or Coast Guard boarding team to take over for us. While the anti-smuggling operations during the late 1990s and early 2000s were better than nothing, they were hardly challenging missions. I had conducted a number of them while I was an assistant platoon commander, but we never fired a shot. And to be frank, there was never even a real, legitimate threat. But it was our mission, and we did it professionally. Those missions were a far cry from being on the ground in Iraq hunting down terrorists. In Iraq, the threat level was infinitely higher and the operations infinitely more aggressive. Because we were all so inexperienced in combat, I got down in the weeds on much of the planning and execution of the operations. With my first time in real combat, I subconsciously felt I had something to prove, to myself and to those around me. In order to ensure we did the best possible job, I got very granular in the entire mission process. As soon as we received a target from our intelligence group, I was all over it, looking at the routes into and out of the target, poring over the intel, helping plan the breach team sequence, task organizing the assault force, building the loadout plan for the Humvees, running rehearsals. In short, I owned everything in my world. All of it. Of course, I wanted my junior personnel to step up, to take ownership and lead some of the missions themselves, but they didn't. And this was a little surprising because I had solid senior and junior enlisted personnel who I knew could handle much more. But they weren't taking ownership the way I needed them to. So I continued to oversee everything in close detail. I micromanaged. But there was only so much I could do and so much I could own. Very quickly, our operational tempo picked up. On top of the direct action missions we conducted to capture or kill enemy insurgents, we began to conduct numerous additional operations, including airborne and vehicle-borne reconnaissance missions and other intelligence-gathering operations. One morning we were tasked with multiple reconnaissance missions, and we received information for 2 simultaneous potential direct action capture-kill missions that evening. I knew there was no way to own all those operations myself. I assigned responsibility for each of the missions to 4 of my junior leaders and told them to come up with a plan, deconflict with each other for assets and personnel, and check in with me after they came up with their plans. Then, I stood back and let them go. The results were beyond anything I'd expected. They took ownership. Not only did they come up with solid, tactically sound plans, they also got creative and developed new and innovative ideas to make our execution of those plans more effective. Most important, they took full ownership of the operations and worked with all the confidence and aggressive leadership we needed to be successful in combat. It was everything I had wished for them to do from the start. Of course, I still took extreme ownership. This is the underlying philosophy that guides everything I did, and still do, as a leader. I was still 100% responsible for their operations, their plans, the manner they executed missions, and the success or failure of those missions. But my ownership had to be balanced with decentralized command. I needed to allow them to own the missions at their level so they were fully empowered and could execute with conviction and lead from their positions with certitude. The more our operational tempo picked up, the less time I had to spend in the weeds and the more ownership they demonstrated. Soon, I was doing nothing more than a cursory check of their mission plans before sending them out to conduct operations on their own without me, my assistant platoon commander, or my platoon chief. In other words, without senior SEAL supervision. Yet, my junior leaders performed tremendously well, and I learned a valuable lesson. The reason they hadn't stepped up prior to this was that I hadn't allowed it. My attitude of taking extreme ownership of everything had left them with nothing to own. They didn't realize it, nor did I, but my micromanagement was so controlling that they had shut down mentally. Not that they gave up or had a bad attitude, they didn't at all. But as a leader, I had set the precedent that I would do everything myself. And when I ran everything, they just sat back and waited for me to dictate the plan and make the calls. As soon as I backed off and let them start to run things, they ran with everything, and they ran hard. It was beautiful to behold. I watched them delve into their missions with total intensity and dedication. The benefits to this approach were multifaceted. First, since I was no longer in the weeds, I saw much more of the big picture. I was able to start focusing on coordination with other elements in the area, gaining a better picture of the intelligence, and making sure I fully understood the terrain and the targets in the area. Second, since I was not focused on one specific operation, I was able to see how the different operations might support or conflict with each other. From this perspective, I was able to better allocate resources to the right places and at the right times without burning out our people or equipment. Finally, with my subordinate leadership running the tactical operations, I had the chance to look at operations at a little higher level. I could now piece together the intelligence picture and understand how we could capture or kill the most terrorists possible. It allowed me to start looking up and out at the next level instead of looking down and in at my own team. While I had known that ownership, extreme ownership, was critical for a leader, this situation made me realize that I had taken it too far. True extreme ownership meant that all responsibility rested with me as the leader. It didn't mean that I, as the leader, personally did everything myself. My misunderstanding of extreme ownership had overrun the decentralized command that was integral for our platoon to execute most effectively. I had to find the right balance between taking all ownership myself and allowing my team to take ownership. But there were other times when I hadn't taken enough ownership, when I had let the dichotomy slide too far in the other direction and been too hands-off. Prior to arriving in Iraq, my platoon was preparing and rehearsing for an important and sensitive mission. It was a maritime operation that required us to create some new techniques for rendezvousing with a vessel at sea and then transferring people under extreme conditions. As a leader trying to practice decentralized command, I strove to empower my subordinate leaders and let them lead. So I tasked one of my senior SEAL petty officers to lead the operation. This included creating the new techniques and running the training and rehearsals to ensure we were prepared to execute. He was an experienced, mature SEAL with a great operational reputation, and I trusted him and knew he would get the job done. The mission called for us to work closely with a Naval Special Warfare NSW boat unit, the crews who operated high-speed watercraft designed to support SEAL missions. We needed to collaborate with them to understand how best to utilize their assets. The senior petty officer set up some meetings with the boat unit, and we began initial pier-side dry runs where we practiced the techniques on land and rehearsals at sea to develop and test the procedures we were going to use. The new procedures utilized gear and equipment we were already familiar with: maritime radios, night vision goggles, radar, 1-inch tubular nylon, and some other maritime rigging. Once we had the concept figured out, it was fairly straightforward and relatively easy. As we continued the meetings and pier-side rehearsals, I noticed my senior SEAL petty officer was running things relatively loosely compared with the approach I would normally have taken. And because I wasn't breathing down his neck, he didn't provide much oversight on the rest of the platoon either. The more slack he gave the platoon, the more they took advantage of it. When we met the boat crew at 0700, some of our guys would arrive at 0659. When the platoon had planned to do 6 rehearsals, we would only execute 3 rehearsals. Guys were showing up in incomplete uniforms, even mixing in some civilian clothes. They looked unprofessional. And while the platoon was rehearsing the mission the way they predicted it would happen, they weren't rehearsing any unexpected contingencies. This went on for a couple of weeks as we got closer and closer to executing the actual mission. I maintained my lofty attitude and allowed the senior petty officer to continue to lead with a relative amount of slack. I didn't feel comfortable with it, but I wanted him to have ownership and know that I trusted him. My gut was telling me it had gone too far. I had allowed things to get too loose. But I never addressed it with my senior petty officer or the platoon. I figured that since I had put him in charge, he had to own it. That changed the first day we were to rehearse at sea. We had an underway time of 0600, meaning the NSW boats would launch from the pier at 0600 sharp. I showed up in uniform, prepared and ready to go at 0530 and boarded one of the two vessels to which I had been assigned. I checked and rechecked my gear and made sure I was ready to execute. As 0600 approached, the rest of the platoon straggled in. 2 or 3 guys at a time, in sloppy uniforms, rushing around, running late. By 0600, 2 of our guys were still missing. The Special Boat Unit Chief approached our senior petty officer and told him it was time to get underway. The senior petty officer explained that he had just talked to the last 2 guys and they were running a few minutes late and that we needed to wait for them. They arrived and crossed the brow, the gangway from the pier, onto the boat at 0607. 7 minutes late. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed for myself, embarrassed for the platoon, and embarrassed for the SEAL teams. Normally, a Navy ship would leave stragglers behind, and those stragglers would miss movement, as it's called in the Navy, a substantial violation that incurs severe punishment. But since this mission revolved around our participation, the boat chief agreed we would wait for the 2 SEALs. But it was still inexcusable. Finally, with all our platoon on board, the 2 NSW boats got underway and moved out over the horizon out of visibility from the shore. Once we were on station at sea in the area we had designated for rehearsal, the senior petty officer gave the order to commence. The platoon members moved into their positions and started to work, setting up rigging, breaking out our communications gear, and preparing to execute the actions at the objective. Since I was letting the senior petty officer run this mission, I carried out my assigned tasks as if I were one of the SEAL shooters, one of the frontline troopers. Then I sensed some distress and then panic among the platoon. From the conversations among the SEALs in the platoon, it was clear something was missing. I don't have it. I thought you brought it. Where did you put it last time? That wasn't my job. No one told me to get it. I watched quietly for a few minutes as the platoon panicked. Then I walked over to the senior petty officer. "What's the issue?" I asked him. "We forgot the 1-inch tubular nylon," he said dejectedly, knowing that this simple item was a mission-critical piece of equipment. Once again, I was disappointed, embarrassed, and angry. It was clear that, as a leader, I had been too hands-off. "Roger," I told him. "Well, you better figure something out, quick. Start with the boat chief. They might have somewhere." The senior petty officer asked various people if they had any extra 1-inch tubular nylon. Eventually, the boat crew guys came up with enough 1/2-inch tubular nylon that we could tie together and use to execute the mission. It was not pretty, not ideal, and not as safe as we would have liked it, but we made it work. Worse, we were now running even further behind schedule, all of which was nobody's fault but our own. We continued with the rehearsal, completed the mock mission, and then headed back to the pier. There, we offloaded our gear and made our way back across the base to our platoon planning space. Back in our platoon planning space, I had the platoon debrief the training operation. They mentioned the missing gear and some other things that we needed to do better. But the criticism was light compared to what it should have been. I didn't say anything. As the debrief wound down, I asked, "Does anyone have anything else?" No one did. I sat for a moment to be sure. No one addressed our subpar performance. This was not good. I had to take extreme ownership. I called the platoon leadership into my office. They could tell I was not happy. When the last man came in, I shut the door. "I want to do every one of your jobs. All of them," I told them bluntly. "I know how to do them, and I know how to do them right. I know how to make sure no one is ever late. I know how to make sure we never forget anything for a mission, ever. I know exactly how to do that, and I want to do that. I want to run this platoon. I want to run every facet of this platoon to the exacting and unwavering standards that I know cannot be questioned. But I also know that isn't the right way to run a platoon. I know that will stifle your growth as SEAL leaders. So, I am going to give you one more chance. One more chance to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. No one will ever be late again. No one will ever forget gear again. Everyone will be early. You will inspect all gear. You will conduct every mission, every operation, every training event as if it was the most important thing in your life. If we drop the ball one more time, you are done, and I am taking over. That will be it. Do you understand? The senior SEAL petty officer, a friend of mine and a solid SEAL, knew exactly where I was coming from. He knew I was right and that I meant what I said. "We got it, sir," he replied. "This won't happen again. I will make sure of it. We all will." And that was that. The platoon never let me down again. A few weeks later, we deployed to Iraq and conducted combat mission after mission, aggressively pursuing the enemy throughout the country. The threat I had made of micromanagement after the maritime operation had been enough to change their attitudes, their actions, and their ownership. They never slacked off again. Instead, I was the one who had to slack off a little once we got to Iraq. I had to let them take charge. I had to let them take ownership. I had to let them lead. I had to balance the dichotomy between taking too much ownership and not taking enough. Principle. Micromanagement and hands-off leadership styles are obviously opposites. The micromanager tries to control every thought and action of each individual on the team. Micromanagement fails because no one person can control multiple people executing a vast number of actions in a dynamic environment where changes in the situation occur rapidly and with unpredictability. It also inhibits the growth of subordinates. When people become accustomed to being told what to do, they begin to await direction. Initiative fades and eventually dies. Creativity and bold thought and action soon die as well. The team becomes a bunch of simple and thoughtless automatons, following orders without understanding, moving forward only when told to do so. A team like that will never achieve greatness. The hands-off leader with a laissez-faire attitude is on the opposite end of the spectrum. Such a leader fails to provide specific direction. In some cases, almost no clear direction whatsoever. Instead of a lack of thought like a team that is being micromanaged, a team with a hands-off leader thinks too much. Its members have grand ideas and plans. They come up with new tactics and procedures. They even start to develop their own broad strategies beyond the boundaries of their responsibilities and competence. Such grandiose ideas and thoughts become a major problem when they are not aligned with the greater vision and goals of the company. So the troops, instead of pushing the team toward its strategic goals, move in random directions. They not only fail to provide each other with simple support, but often work on projects or efforts that directly conflict with what other members of the team are doing. In order to correctly balance these two leadership styles, a leader must find the middle ground and pay attention to the team, ensuring that the leader doesn't push too far in one direction or the other. There are some clear warning signs that indicate when a leader has leaned too far in the direction of one of these leadership styles. Here are some common symptoms that result from micromanagement. 1. The team shows a lack of initiative. Members will not take action unless directed. 2. The team does not seek solutions to problems. Instead, its members sit and wait to be told about a solution. 3. Even in an emergency, A team that is being micromanaged will not mobilize and take action. 4. Bold and aggressive action becomes rare. 5. Creativity grinds to a halt. 6. The team tends to stay in their own silo, not stepping out to coordinate efforts with other departments or divisions for fear of overstepping their bounds. 7. An overall sense of passivity and failure to react. Once a leader sees these behaviors in the team, corrective action must be taken. The leader must pull back from giving detailed direction. Instead of explaining what the mission is and how to accomplish it, the leader should explain the broad goal of the mission, the end state that is desired, and why the mission is important, and then allow the team to plan how to execute the mission. The leader should continue to monitor what is happening and check the progress of the team, but refrain from giving specific guidance on the execution unless the plan that is being formulated by the team will have extremely negative results. Finally, if there is an opportunity when time and risk levels permit, a leader can step away from the team completely and allow it to plan and execute a mission on its own. In Task Unit Bruiser, this was done regularly during our pre-deployment training cycle. Senior leadership, including Leif, the Delta Platoon Commander Seth Stone, and the senior enlisted personnel, would step back and allow junior leaders to step up, plan, and execute training missions. We saw the junior leaders quickly transform from passively waiting to be told what to do into proactive leaders who assessed problems and implemented solutions. Here are common symptoms that indicate when a leader is too hands-off with his team. 1. Lack of vision in what the team is trying to do and how to do it. 2. Lack of coordination between individuals on the team and efforts that often compete or interfere with each other. 3. Initiative oversteps the bounds of authority, and both individuals and teams carry out actions that are beyond what they have the authorization to do. 4. Failure to coordinate. While a micromanaged team might not coordinate with other teams because it doesn't want to overstep its bounds, a team without good guidance may also fail to coordinate not out of fear, but out of ignorance. In its effort to solve problems and accomplish the mission, the team forgets that other teams might also be maneuvering and end up interfering with their efforts. 5. The team is focused on the wrong priority mission or pursuit of solutions that are not in keeping with the strategic direction of the team or the commander's intent. 6. There are too many people trying to lead. Since everyone is trying to lead, there won't be enough people to execute. Instead of progress, the leader will see discussion. Instead of action, the leader will see prolonged debate. Instead of unified movement, the leader will see fractured elements pursuing individual efforts. When these behaviors are observed by a leader, there are some basic actions to take to get the team back on course. First and foremost, clear guidance must be given. The mission, the goal, and the end state must be explained in a simple, clear, and concise manner. The team must also understand the boundaries that are in place and what actions to take should it bump up against those boundaries. If multiple, simultaneous, overlapping efforts are being pursued, the leader must decide on and clearly implement the chosen course of action. The team must also be educated on efforts being executed by other teams so that deconfliction can occur. Finally, if a team is paralyzed by too many people trying to lead, the classic case of too many coaches, not enough players, then the leader must assign and clearly delineate the chain of command, roles, and responsibilities of the team leaders and give them proper authority. I saw this manifest itself in SEAL task units, including Task Unit Bruiser, when a mission tasking would be given to the platoons without a clearly assigned lead. A SEAL task unit consists of 2 platoons, each with its own leadership: a platoon commander, a platoon chief, an assistant platoon commander, and a leading petty officer. If a mission was given to the platoons without assigning a platoon as the lead, they would both begin to come up with their own separate and distinct plans and courses of action. The longer the platoons were left without guidance as to which one would lead on the operation, the further they would head down the paths of their own plans, wasting time and effort. This is easily solved by delineating one platoon as the lead element on the operation and the other as the supporting element. With that clear direction, efforts were coordinated and the team could work together toward a unified plan. But once again, the key is balance, maintaining an equilibrium where the troops have the guidance to execute, but at the same time, the freedom to make decisions and lead. Application to business. The finished product had been sold. The problem was the finished product wasn't finished yet. Sure, there were some functional beta models that had been manufactured one at a time by hand, but no final version had been solidified. Furthermore, no standard manufacturing process had been established for a large production run. What made this even harder was the industry. The product was to be utilized in cars, which added some significant difficulties. First, the software to integrate it had to be interoperable with several different manufacturers and their car models. Second, the product had to fit into pre-designed spaces that allowed no significant change in shape or volume of the equipment. Finally, given the safety regulations in vehicle production, there was very little leeway with regard to material that could be used in manufacturing. When I showed up to run leadership training aimed at developing new leaders at this growing company, things seemed to be on track. While the company was well established with many years in the industry, it was in a growth phase and needed training for newly promoted and hired leaders. The attitude at the company was excellent, and the employees were abuzz with the opportunities ahead and the promising progress on the horizon. There was also a great deal of confidence. Much of the company's growth was geared toward supporting a high demand signal for a new product that the company planned to release. When I first showed up to work with the company, it was in the final stages of the new product rollout. They had completed the bulk of the design, done preliminary testing on the software, and initiated the rollout of a manufacturing process for adaptation to the final design. Sales had already started, and they were strong. Overall, I was impressed with the situation and how things were going. I spent most of my time training the newly promoted and hired leaders. The rest of the time I spent in familiarization with the company's leadership and the state of the business. When the 3-day leadership development program I ran for the company's new leaders was complete, I departed with a plan to return in 6 weeks. At that time, I would host follow-on training for those leaders from the first course and run a new course for the next round of new hires and recently promoted leaders. But when I returned 6 weeks later, the atmosphere at the company had completely changed. Gone was the enthusiasm and the confidence. Gone was the vision of opportunity and success. There was a new attitude, fear and uncertainty. The CEO was blunt with me. "I don't think we are going to make it," he said, referring to the scheduled release of the new product. "Since the last time you were here, we have barely moved. Our progress has ground to a halt. The teams just aren't getting anything done." "Are these the team leaders that I just trained?" I asked him, referring to the group of mid-level managers who had been through Echelon Front's basic leadership course. "No, not at all," the CEO answered. "They are the least of my problems. I am not getting performance from my senior leaders." "What seems to be the issue?" I asked. "I don't know," he replied, "but we need to get it fixed. Can we postpone your next block of training for the mid-level managers so you can spend a few days with my senior leadership team to figure out what is wrong?" "I think so," I answered. "Let me confirm my schedule." I called Jamie, our director of operations at Echelon Front, who quickly shifted some events in my schedule and freed up the time so I could adapt to the CEO's request and engage with the company's senior leadership team. "Do you want to talk to the team?" the CEO asked. I had already put his senior leadership team through a course on extreme ownership and the fundamental principles of combat leadership. They seemed to have grasped it pretty well. I didn't need to say more. I needed to get in and see what was happening and where the issue was. No, I replied. I have talked enough. I need to see the team in action. When is the next meeting where the whole group will be together? Well, actually, we have a meeting in a few minutes with everyone and then another one just after lunch, the CEO replied. And in between those two and throughout the afternoon, I meet with the leaders and their team lead. Busy schedule. How many times a week do you hold those meetings? I asked. We actually hold them every day. There is a lot going on right now, and I have to take ownership, extreme ownership, to keep things in check and on track. Got it, I replied slowly, as I wondered if I'd just gotten my first indication of the problem. We walked down the hallway and into the first meeting. The entire leadership team was present. I thought the meeting would be a quick, broad update of what was happening. I was wrong. Each leader gave a full update of what was happening in his or her department. Minute details were covered that should have been outside the scope of the executive-level team. As courses of action were discussed, virtually indistinguishable options were presented and drawn-out arguments made, and finally, the CEO made decisions on how the various teams would execute. The meeting lasted nearly 2 full hours. If that wasn't bad enough, as soon as the meeting concluded, it was followed by another meeting, this time with the engineering team, which wanted guidance on what manufacturers to use for several parts of the product. That meeting, which also got bogged down in details, lasted another 45 minutes. Before we knew it, it was lunchtime. I walked with the CEO back to his office. While we ate, he answered a plethora of questions that had come through email and made 2 phone calls, not to his direct reports, but to frontline engineers who explained some minute elements of the electronic components to be embedded in the new product. After these email conversations and phone calls, we went into the afternoon leadership huddle. I again hoped the meeting would be a quick confirmation of progress made and any necessary troubleshooting. Once again, I was wrong. Like the others before it, this meeting quickly devolved into a detailed discussion of the minutiae involved in every aspect of the engineering, manufacturing, marketing, and sale of the product. The CEO drilled down on each aspect of the planning and execution and made decisions at every level. As I looked around at the others in the meeting, I expected to see frustration. But most of the faces didn't look frustrated. They sat and stared and waited for their turn to talk and get questions answered by the CEO. There was no emotion, no frustration or sense of urgency. There was no initiative in the group. 2 more days went by with much of the same. Meetings, meetings, meetings. Decisions were made, almost every single one of them, by the CEO. Finally, after one meeting ended, the CEO and I walked back to his office. Now do you see what I'm talking about? He asked. I do indeed, I responded. They aren't taking any initiative. They aren't pushing things to happen. They aren't taking ownership, he lamented. That was very evident in every one of those meetings, I noted. So, what do I do? The CEO asked. How can I get them to take extreme ownership? The answer is simple, but it isn't easy, I answered. You have to give them ownership. I'm trying to, and I'm taking ownership to set the example, but they aren't taking any ownership at all, the CEO complained. Yes, that is exactly what is happening. You are taking ownership, but you are taking too much ownership, I told the CEO. Too much ownership? He asked, confused. You didn't even tell me that was possible. It is. And yes, I should have explained that more clearly to you, I said. Leaders can actually take too much ownership. Yes, with extreme ownership, you are responsible for everything in your world. But you can't make every decision. You have to empower your team to lead, to take ownership. So you have to give them ownership. When a leader tries to own everything, to run every single move their team makes, I continued, it doesn't work. Maybe it is the desire to make sure everything goes right. Maybe it is a lack of trust that subordinate leaders know what to do. Maybe it is ego. Leaders want to feel they are the person who is critical for every little decision. But when a leader takes too much ownership, there is no ownership left for the team or subordinate leaders to take. So the team loses initiative. They lose momentum. They won't make any decisions. They just sit around and wait to be told what to do. Although this was a lot to absorb, I could see it was making complete sense to the CEO. "I've smothered them, haven't I?" he said. "Well, that's a strong word. That implies death," I joked, but metaphorically, yes, that is a good description of what has happened. "So what do I do now?" the CEO asked. "Give them space. Give them air," I instructed. "Let them breathe again. You have to let them make decisions. You have to let them plot the course. You need to tell them the destination, but you need to let them figure out how to get there. You have to let them take ownership, real ownership of their piece of the mission. Then you'll have a team with a culture of true, effective, extreme ownership, and your performance will skyrocket." That sounds good, but how do I actually make that happen from a tactical perspective? The CEO inquired. "First, let's cut down all the meetings. That is one of the reasons things aren't moving. Instead of finding solutions, right now they just ask you for the solution. When you do have meetings, stop being the easy button," I told him. "The easy button? How am I an easy button?" the CEO asked. "By answering every question, solving every problem, and making every single decision," I answered. "Why should your leaders think for themselves when they can just press the easy button and have you think for them and make the decisions for them as well? And they can blame you if something goes wrong because you made the decision. When you do all that for them, they don't need to think or act, and then they won't think or act. That's where these guys are at." "But if I don't answer their questions," the CEO began. I cut him off. "Then they will answer the questions themselves. They will find solutions themselves. They will work together to solve problems at the source instead of running them up to you." "So, decentralized command is what you're talking about, right?" the CEO asked. "Exactly," I said. "And that is the balance you need to find. The balance between decentralized command and extreme ownership. When your team is too decentralized, no one knows what direction to go. Too much ownership, and people won't act with any level of initiative." "And I've gone too far in that direction. I've taken too much ownership," the CEO recognized. "Yeah," I replied, "but it's okay. You are recognizing the dichotomy. Now, swing the pendulum back, but make sure you don't go too far. I see people make that mistake all the time. They overcorrect themselves. So, make the move. Cancel some of the meetings. Let the teams and the leaders make decisions. But don't completely check out. You don't need to row the boat or even steer it. You just have to make sure it is heading in the right direction." Over the next few weeks, the CEO adjusted his level of control. I had to restrain him a few times and ease him away from his tendency to run everything himself, but he did check himself, and the change from his subordinate leadership and the rest of the team came about fairly quickly. Within a few weeks, their attitude shifted. Leaders at every level of the team began to lead. They took ownership. Progress picked up, and the team got the product back on target for launch.